Ranger hearts with lion's pride, brave and mighty by design. You never have to watch your back when Power Rangers lead the pack. Like an eagle they will soar to win the battle and the war against the evil in their way, shedding light on darkened days. Unleash the beast inside to keep our hope alive. When our peaks must increase, call the Power Rangers digital beasts to defend you and I. Power Rangers never draw the line. When our peaks must increase, call the Power Rangers digital beasts to defend you and I. Power Rangers never draw the line. Go, go, go! Rangers go!
As our heroes adjust to the events that have happened lately, they cannot afford to get comfortable, for a creature is roaming around the city causing havoc. It is up to them to tame it.
At the base, Maxwell and Grace call Jackson and the other Rangers into the main room. Maxwell says,
Guys, a new sword has popped up around the city and we're having trouble finding it.
Jackson says,
Dad, we're willing to help if you need us to.
the others nod their head in agreement. Maxwell then says,
Alright, son, I'll entertain your plan. I'll send a search team in the forest, you guys go and search the city.
Jackson says,
Let's split up and go look around the places where the Zord has been spotted.
Alexa then says,
Sounds good to me.
Lion then says,
Okay, brother.
Becky then says,
I'm with it if you guys are.
in different parts of the city the team splits up and looks for the Gazelle Zord. Becky is at the mall pondering and looking around at dresses, imagining herself in them while Jackson says,
Why did I walk by the mall?
Becky goes over to Jackson and asks him to come into the store with her, and Jackson answers,
But we got to find the Zord. We don't have time for this today.
Becky says,
Come on, Jackson, it will be quick.
Jackson looks at Becky with a sarcastic glare on his face because he knows it will be longer than that. Jackson says,
Yes, but only for a few minutes today.
As he is finishing his sentence, Becky pulls him in the store. Lion and Colby are looking in the local junkyard. Colby says,
Leon, are you sure this is the place? It stinks here. Why would a Zord want to be here?
Lion then looks around and mutters under his breath,
Why did they pair us together? I'd rather not hear this damn nagging today.
Colby hears him and says,
What?
Lion rebuttals.
Nothing. Just try to look on that side, man.
Alexa is looking at the local beach and trying to resist her urge to swim in the water. Alexa says in her head,
Must stay away from water?
on the Chaos Squadron ship, Lord Zion says,
So Groper, who will you choose to carry out the next plan?
Groper says,
Master, I need more time to make my decision. My decisions take time to strategize.
Zion replies,
I grow tired of waiting. I demand you come up with something quick. My patience is wearing thin.
Groper then says,
Don't worry, Master. Once the decision is made, you will be delighted.
in the store, Becky tries on a red dress and says,
So, what do you think, Jackson?
Jackson gazes at her and takes in her beauty for a second. Jackson then says,
You look amazing.
Becky then replies and says,
Thanks, and I'm sure Maxwell wouldn't mind me spending most of my allowance on a few dresses today.
Jackson says,
I don't think that's what he would want.
but he is interrupted by Becky, who pulls on Jackson's arm again and takes him on another shopping spree with her. After the spree, Jackson and Becky are sitting in the food court. Becky says,
This figurine looks like a gazelle.
Jackson then says,
Becky, we've got to get back to the mission. We don't have time to play around.
Becky says,
Jackson, calm down. Why not have a little fun while we're at it?
Jackson then says,
I would like to have fun, but this Zord could put the odds in our favor.
Becky then says,
But I really have enjoyed spending time with you.
Jackson's phone rings and interrupts their conversation. Maxwell then says,
Yo, son, the sword has just been tracked down by a great set of forum. I'll send you all the information and details. I need you to go check out the scene right now.
Jackson hangs up the phone and says,
Becky, I promise we'll do something later, but now we've got to get that Zord.
Upon the hillside, a new monster arrives and says, "Look at all these targets, this is going to be fun." He then takes out his bow and shoots people with arrows that are stored in his arm. Colby, Alexa, and Lion then hear the explosions. They run towards the hillside and see arrows flying. As they gaze, they see the arrows strike people and incapacitate them. As they look around, they spot a green monster with a body that resembles blocks dressed in a green bracer. Lion says,
Guys, let's take him down.
The monster then responds and says,
I have a name, and it is Archtron, and I am the greatest archer of all time.
Alexa replies,
I doubt it. I seen Becky shoot better arrows.
All three then pull out their digital prisms and press the button with the morphing icon on it and says,
Digital prism! Digitize!
The three then go into a morphing sequence and prisms form around them along with digital grids and crystallize into Power Rangers suits. The three then charge toward Archtron and began fighting him. The three then strike him with different hits and gain the upper hand during the fight, and Archtron says,
I won't be defeated so easily.
He then jumps back and shoots the three with his bow and arrows, but the Rangers dodge them. He then says,
Okay, that's enough for now.
And then jumps away from the hillside. Lion tries to follow him, but trips over a pebble and falls on the ground. The fall causes him to demorph, and Alexa runs over with Colby following behind her. Alexa and Colby then help him up. Alexa then says,
Leon, you got to be more careful.
Colby then says,
We'll tend to his wounds later. We have to go after Archtron.
Alexa says,
Where do we even start to look for him?
Colby then says,
Well, he was attacking crowds of people. Let's start at the plaza. That's where a lot of people tend to be.
Alexa then says,
I wonder what's up about those arrows.
Colby says,
Let's take one of them to Maxwell. Maybe he can tell.
Back on the Chaos Squadron ship, Groper questions Razor about his recent actions. Groper says,
Razor, I said it was my turn. Why is someone already out there?
Razor says,
You were taking a century to make a move, so I took matters into my own hands.
Groper says,
As I've said before, patience is a virtue.
Razor then says,
Take all day for all I care. By the time you figure out something, my guy will have the city in ruins.
Groper rebuttals.
Ignoramus.
Razor utters,
You've got one more time to insult me. The next time you do, I will bash your head in.
Zion then yells,
Silence! It's not about whose guy conquers the city first. It's about who's actually achieves it.
Zion then walks up to the two from his throne and says,
If Razor's guy is defeated, I assure you, Grouper, you will have an extra turn.
Zion then looks at Razor and says,
You realize you've cost yourself a turn in the future, right?
Razor answers,
Yes, Master.
On the rural side of town, Jackson calls his dad on his phone and says,
Dad, me and Becky heard the explosions and are going to take a mobile express downtown.
Maxwell then says,
No, son, you guys keep doing what you're doing. I've assigned the others to handle it.
Becky and Jackson arrive at a farm and see a farmer couple waiting at the gate. The man stands 6 feet, is Caucasian, has brown hair, and looks to be in his early 60s. The woman stands 5 feet 1, has gray hair, is Caucasian, and also looks to be in her mid-50s. When Jackson and Becky arrive at the gate, Becky says,
I can see the Zord's tail, but how are we going to get in there?
Jackson then says,
Let me think for a minute.
While the two are contemplating a plan, they are interrupted by the farmer couple, and the couple introduce themselves as Johnny Dean and Laura Ann. Johnny then says, So what brings you, city folks, out here? Becky then stumbles over her words for a minute, and then Jackson says,
We're the Super Animal Patrol. Our job is to capture giant creatures who could cause trouble.
Johnny says, Fella, I'm glad you showed up to get that thing off our hands. Me and my wife were tending the farm this morning, and out of nowhere this giant creature showed up. Jackson then says,
Sir, we'll handle the problem in no time.
Becky, bewildered, says,
Yeah, our services are the best in the city.
Johnny and Laura walk them to the back of their farm. Johnny says, "Fella, I think this is it." Johnny points at the giant brownish Zord as it eats the grass off the farm. When Jackson and Becky see it, their digital prisms start beeping like a car alarm. Becky then pulls out her prism and holds it up to the Zord, and the prism scans it and the Zord transfers inside the prism. Jackson says,
I didn't know they could do that.
Becky rebuttals.
Yeah, we could capture Zords inside our digital prisms. It helps us transport them from place to place.
Jackson replies,
Indeed.
and says,
Sir, thank you so much. You just don't know how much we've gone through to find this. Is there any way we could compensate you? I know you've gone through a lot.
Johnny then responds and says, "Fella, we don't want anything. We're just glad you got rid of that thing. It has eaten half of our plants. If you two need any help, call us again." Johnny leads them to the gate and says, "You guys may not be able to take Mobile Express, and the nearest bus stop should be a half-mile ahead. Y'all take care now." Jackson and Becky say bye and leave together. Jackson and Becky walk out on the side of the road. Jackson says,
We don't have time to walk to that bus stop. We'll just have to take our chances by taking Mobile Express.
Becky replies,
It's worth a try.
Jackson then checks the Mobile Express app and says,
No way. It's a driver 5 minutes away.
Becky then says,
Request it quick.
Jackson requests the driver, and the driver arrives in a sports car and lets the two in. The driver then says, "Don't worry, I'll put on some headphones and let you talk to your girlfriend." Jackson exclaims,
She's not my girlfriend.
The driver then says, "Whatever you say." Jackson then looks at Becky and says,
Becky, I've asked everyone this but you. So what's Earth been like to you?
Becky answers,
It's been a nice vacation from home, and I could get used to all this shopping and pampering myself, but I also wonder how humans would react if they visited Eden.
Jackson says,
Well, I've gotten to know you guys, and let me tell you, I'd rather have you guys by my side than most, especially you.
Becky blushes and says,
Jackson, you've made my day.
Jackson and Becky then gaze into each other's eyes and move towards kissing each other, but are interrupted by Archtron as the car enters his sight. Archtron says,
These are the perfect targets for me.
Archtron then blasts the truck's tires. The car starts to sputter out of control and the driver takes his headphones off and says, "Oh shit." Jackson and Becky fall back on each other as the driver tries to get control of the car. Jackson says,
Be careful, man. Are you trying to kill us?
The driver then says, "You know what, screw this job." He then stops the car and jumps out of it. Becky then says,
Well, at least he's out the way.
Jackson then gets angry and balls up his fists. Becky then puts her hand on Jackson's arm and says,
Jackson, calm down.
As Jackson moves her hand from around his arm, Colby, Alexa, and Lion appears and sees Archtron aiming his arm at the car. Lion then blasts one of his arms with his beast's blaster and says,
Not so fast, damn it.
Archtron then grips his arm and says,
Bye-bye.
and blasts arrows at the three. The three then duck and the arrows miss once again. Jackson is angered and then hops outside the car and says,
You're going to pay for that.
Archtron then says,
Damn it, that was my last arrow.
Jackson then walks toward him and says,
Your day is about to take a turn for the worse.
Jackson pulls out the digital prism and presses the button with the morphing icon on it and says,
Ditch the prism! Digitize!
and instamorphs. He then runs toward Archtron with his Sparrow Saber and fights him. Jackson says,
Your timing sucks.
Archtron says,
I don't give a damn about timing. I only care about striking my targets.
Jackson says angrily,
The only target that's going to be struck is you.
Jackson then strikes him with a punch. As they're fighting on the truck, Archtron hits Jackson and he struggles to keep his balance on the truck. As he's falling, he activates beast mode and flies back on the truck. Archtron then lands a vicious kick combination on Jackson and pulls a handle off the top of the truck, and as he's attempting to hit him, Becky blasts him with her beast's blaster and says,
Looks like you needed a hand, Jax.
Jackson then spins around, flies toward him, and knocks him back a far distance away from the scene. Jackson then lands on the ground and powers down and meets up with the others. Jackson says,
I can't believe I got that mad.
Lion then says,
Better you than me, brother.
Alexa then says,
You've got quite the punch, Jackson.
And Alexa punches him in the arm. Jackson, with pain in his voice, says,
Yeah.
Maxwell then calls Jackson and says,
Becky and Jackson, good job on finding the sword. And also, those arrows are poisonous, so you guys might want to be careful and not get hit by those. The only way to cure the infected is to take down Archtron.
Jackson replies,
Okay, Dad.
Alexa says,
I wonder where he landed.
Jackson says,
He's probably in the forest.
The five then run towards the forest. As Archtron is recovering from the hit, Zila appears in the forest and says,
Here are more arrows. Now stop playing around and strike one of those rangers with these.
Archtron replies,
Thanks. You and Lord Zion will not be disappointed.
Zila then leaves. The Rangers then find him and he says,
My target practice will never end.
Jackson says,
We'll see about that.
Lion then says,
Let's morph.
All five pull out their digital prisms with different colored cartridges, insert them in the prism and press the button with a ranger icon on it and then say,
Digital prism! Digitize!
The five then go into a morphing sequence and prisms form around them along with digital grids and crystallize into Power Ranger suits. They all then go into their roll call. Jackson says,
Digital Beast Red.
Alexa says,
Digital Beast Silver.
Colby says,
Digital Beast Green!
Lion says,
Digital Beast Yellow.
Becky says,
Digital Beast Pink.
all five of them say in unison,
Using the powers of the digital age in Eden. Power Rangers Digital Beast.
Archtron summons Pixels and says,
Pixels, get them.
The Rangers then go and fight the Pixels. The Rangers then take them out with their weapons. They then go charge towards Archtron. As the five engage him in a fight, they surround him and overwhelm him with different attacks to distract him from using his arrows. Archtron realizes the strategy, does a backflip and lands on his feet. Archtron says,
Now this is the final shot.
Archtron shoots his arrows, but Becky pulls out her leopard bow and counteracts them with arrows of her own. Jackson says,
Thanks, Becky.
Becky says,
No problem, Jackson.
and then Becky and the other Rangers activate beast mode. Alexa slashes Archtron with her fins. Lion attacks Archtron with his claws, Colby rams Archtron with his antlers, and Becky delivers a devastating blow without being seen with her camouflage ability. As Archtron stumbles across the ground after being hit by the attacks, the Rangers form the Beast's bazooka, aim it at him and all exclaim,
Beast Bazooka! Dynamic Finish!
Jackson pulls the trigger and the blast destroys Archtron. Back on the Chaos Squadron's ship, Razor angrily knocks over something and says,
Zila, give him a reset.
Zila presses a button on the ship. A giant cartridge appears in the city and transforms into Archtron. All five of the Rangers call on their Zords and the Zords charge into the city from the base. The Rangers board the Zords. The Zords charge at Archtron, and as they charge Archtron, he aims his arrow at a mountain, and this causes stones to pile on top of Colby's and Becky's Zord. Jackson says,
Colby and Becky are stuck. We've got to free them, Lion and Alexa.
Lion then says,
I have an idea.
Lion then presses a button on his controller and his Zord roars and the sound waves knock back the stones off Becky's and Colby's Zords. Jackson then says,
Nice, Lion.
Lion then says,
Brother, it's Megazord time.
Jackson then says,
You know it, bro.
In their Zords, the Rangers grab their controllers and press the button with the Megazord logo on it. The Zords then come together and configure into a Megazord with Lion's Zord forming the torso, Colby's Zord forming the head, Alexa's Zord forming the left leg, Becky's Zord forming the right leg, and Jackson's Zord forming the Megazord's back with its wings, while the Megazord's arms sprout out on the side. A sword then descends from the air and lands into the Megazord's hand. The Rangers say,
Digital Beast Megazord!
The five pilot the Megazord towards Archtron and engage in a fight with him. Lion says,
Let's see you try to bury us this time.
Archtron replies.
I like to be challenged.
Archtron then strikes the Megazord with a barrage of arrows and it crashes into a mountain. As the Megazord is struggling to stand, Archtron says,
Time to aim for the head.
As he is getting ready to blast, he is attacked by the Gazelle Zord's horns. Becky then says,
Look, it's the Gazelle Zord.
And Jackson exclaims,
I see.
Archtron says,
This time I'll make sure to put you 6 feet underground.
He then shoots his bow and arrow at the Zord, but it rolls out the way and strikes him with its tail. And as Archtron is trying to throw a counterattack, the Gazelle Zord then charges towards Archtron and headbutts him with its horns. Jackson says,
"This Zord is bold."
Becky says,
It's so vibrant like in the game.
Archtron gets up and says,
The only thing you are is another target for me to hit.
Archtron then attempts to shoot his arrows again, but it has no effect due to the Zord dodging them swiftly. Jackson then says,
"I wonder what else it can do."
The Gazelle Zord then forms into a gauntlet around one of the Megazord's hands. Jackson then says,
"So that's what this Zord does."
Alexa then says,
"Don't spend too much time in amazement. Let's use it!"
All of the Rangers then press buttons on their controllers and shout.
Gazelle Gauntlet! Dynamic Strike!
The Megazord then hits Archtron with a barrage of punches and then hits his body with a hard uppercut. The uppercut destroys Archtron. Jackson says,
"And that level is cleared."
Back at the base, Jackson looks at Becky and says,
"How about we go back to the mall and hang out again?"
Becky says,
Okay, sounds good to me.
Becky then asks,
What about the others? Shouldn't we ask them too?
Jackson looks over at their training and says,
"It seems like they're busy enough."
The two then head toward the exit outside. Maxwell then looks at them afar and says to Grace,
Yo, do you think they like each other?
Grace answers,
Maybe they do. They are starting to remind me of you and Mariah.
Maxwell replies,
Yeah, right. Jackson doesn't have the game that I did. I was quite the Mac back in the day.
Grace replies,
Oh, please. You were nervous around women. You almost fainted when you asked Mariah out.
Maxwell laughs and says,
Yeah, I miss her each and every day. The accident still weighs heavy on my mind.
Grace then says,
Maxwell, she's looking over all of us, especially her son.
Maxwell replies,
You're right, Grace. She sure is.